Donkey Kong, one of the most important games of all time. Not the inventor of the platformer, but one of the first major ones. An innovator in many capacities, one that would go on to define the golden age of arcade games. It was essentially what started Nintendo down its path in the gaming industry. It's a pretty simple game, invoking a lot of old cartoons and its design philosophy throughout. Donkey Kong is extremely concerned with the ideas of the Fleischer cartoon Popeye. The dynamic between Jumpman, or as he would later be known Mario, Donkey Kong, and ladies are direct parallel to that of Popeye, Bluto, and Olive Oyl. The hero, the villain, and the damsel. Yes, I know that her name is Pauline, but at the time her name was just Lady. I mean, that shows how much the gaming industry cares about women. This dynamic has more than just roots in old Fleischer cartoons, though. I think it's indicative of Nintendo themselves. Let's talk a bit about Nintendo's history as a company. It's been around since the 1880s, but wouldn't really get into gaming until 100 years later. Donkey Kong wasn't its first game, of course. There were quite a few before it, like Color TV Game 15. Despite this, it wasn't really able to find its footing in the market. The company ended up wasting a lot of money on a previous arcade machine called Radarscope, which they produced several 100,000 units of that didn't get sold. That game is terrible, by the way. It's stiff, it's unresponsive, it's hard to tell what's even going on. I would not look into it if I were you. That being said, the company decided to take a gambit, refurbish all of the arcade machines into a new game. A little-known developer at the time named Shigeru Miyamoto would helm the project and ended up creating the characters based on the Popeye cartoon specifically because he had wanted to make a Popeye game but could not secure the rights to it. This Popeye game would eventually be made by the company, but it's little more than a footnote in its history. It's just a Popeye game. I think that Donkey Kong is a much more interesting take on the Popeye dynamics as a game, with the Carpenter being a much better everyman than the superpowered Popeye. Through all the refurbishing and the ingenuity and the huge risk Nintendo took, one thing is absolutely clear to me. Donkey Kong in and of itself is a story about Nintendo at the time as well. Nintendo and Jumpman were both plucky up-and-coming icons at the time. Both seemed doomed to fail up against odds that were impossible for them to overcome. It's not every day that you hear about a man beating a gorilla, and even less do you hear about a small company becoming the richest one in Japan. Nintendo created one of the only working-class heroes in gaming because they wanted to represent themselves, and it's hard to say it wasn't effective. The simple narrative of a working-class citizen who can just jump higher than average and instantly dies after falling 2 feet is one that's resonant with lots of people. I would instantly die if I fell more than 2 feet. Jumpman is the everyman. He is the struggle of the worker every day on the construction site. All the obstacles are falling barrels or oil spills creating fires, which are very real dangers. Well, and also jumping springs, which I'm pretty sure are not on construction sites, but still. He's incredibly brittle and average. It's ironic then that Nintendo is much more akin to Donkey Kong than Jumpman himself. Maybe back then, when they were a new company in the gaming sphere, they were more like Jumpman, a plucky group of developers aiming to prove themselves. Though with the amount of financial failures that Nintendo had had before then, I'm certain that they had money to be able to bounce back from them. But now Nintendo is the richest company in Japan. They're a juggernaut that bullies other studios out of the industry, mistreats its workers, and absorbs other development teams into themselves so they can work on their projects. Like poor Brownie Brown, the developers of Mother 3, who are now forced to make stuff like Captain Toad. That's not even to mention the obvious stuff like their aggressive fan game policies. I don't think I need to bring up AM2R, a game that they destroyed just so they can publish their own much more mediocre Metroid 2 remake, Samus Returns. I think a fitting way to demonstrate this metamorphosis into the terrifying monster is the remake of Donkey Kong that would come out 10 years later, known colloquially as Donkey Kong 94. Donkey Kong 94 is an expansion of the game in every respect. It's an impressive and expressive remake. It takes the original 4 levels and then adds 7 more worlds full of their own 4 levels each. It's by no means a bad remake, though I don't think it should replace the original. However, I think it's also indicative of how much changed at Nintendo in just those 10 years. Here was this big budget remake of an arcade game that completely redefined it. It's full of love in some ways, but also far more repetitive. By virtue of its longer length, it feels much more padded. This, to me, represents Nintendo once their games took off. Repetitive, nostalgia-driven through re-releasing old games with changes that shows that they don't understand them. Endlessly trying to recreate their past successes. In a vacuum, Donkey Kong 94 is a great remake, but in the greater context of the company, it's just another title in a swath of iterative and vapid Mario content. Of higher quality, sure, but who's going to notice when there's so much? I mean, just the year before, Super Mario All-Stars released, which is just a glorified re-release of older Mario games. Definitely better than their current offerings in this regard, looking U3D All-Stars, but still nothing new or interesting. When Nintendo became a gigantic company, they took part of their identity with them. Gone is the company that has a completely different gameplay style for each of the sequels to Donkey Kong. Mario is a class traitor. He is no longer a plucky hero of the working class. He hangs out with monarchist imperialists and the very brutish monster that he used to be rivals with. Nintendo has forgotten their roots. They've become the beast. This has been Arcade Everlasting, who actually loves Donkey Kong in spite of what I said about him in this video, signing off. Thank you for watching.